Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you, Julia, for the introduction, and thanks for the beautiful devotional program. We are very, very honored to be sharing with you some work and reflections that we hope will be inspiring to you all and encouraging. I'd like to start with 3 framing quotations. The first is from Baha'u'llah. One of the names of God is the fashioner. He loveth craftsmanship. Therefore, any of his servants who manifesteth this attribute is acceptable in the sight of this wronged one. Craftsmanship is a book among the books of divine sciences, and a treasure among the treasures of his heavenly wisdom. This is a knowledge with meaning, for some of the sciences are brought forth by words and come to an end with words. I'm sure many of you have read selections from the writings about arts and craftsmanship. I have read this before, but in preparation for this panel, I looked at them with fresh eyes, and I was very struck by certain things anew. That God loveth craftsmanship is very striking to me. And also this very mysterious phrase that craftsmanship is a book among the books of divine sciences. The second framing quotation is also from Baha'u'llah. It hath been revealed and is now repeated that the true worth of artists and craftsmen should be appreciated, for they advance the affairs of mankind. Just as the foundations of religion are made firm through the law of God, the means of livelihood depend upon those who are engaged in arts and crafts. True learning is that which is conducive to the well-being of the world, not to pride and self-conceit, or to tyranny, violence, and pillage. So I want to underscore that artists and craftsmen advance the affairs of mankind. Perhaps that's a new idea. I don't know that we think of art that way. And finally, the third quotation I want to share is, the soul that hath remained faithful to the cause of God and stood unwaveringly firm in his path shall after his ascension be possessed of such power that all the worlds which the Almighty hath created can benefit through him. Such a soul provideth at the bidding of the ideal king and divine educator, the pure leaven that leaveneth the world of being, and furnisheth the power through which the arts and wonders of the world are made manifest. Consider how meal needeth leaven to be leavened with. Those souls that are the symbols of detachment are the leaven of the world. Meditate on this and be of the thankful. When Siamak and Sky and I were preparing for this panel, we spoke a lot about our connection with those souls who have passed to the next world. And the connection is very direct, that actually any of the arts and the crafts that we engage in come directly from those pure and holy souls in the next world. So we'd like to have that in mind as we share our reflections. So we're here at ABS, and we are engaging in some conversations and some questions about our various fields, and we'd like to do that a little bit initially about art as well, and a discourse being an ongoing conversation, and that we're learning how to proceed with. So today there's a lot of upheaval and confusion, vigor, passion, and divisiveness in current discourses about a variety of topics, and art is no different. The world of art is grappling with a number of questions about fundamental assumptions and structures underlying it. Some of these questions that come up that you may have thought about that are in the sort of wider community is, how does society understand the role of art, and how art is created? Who can participate in the making of art? Who can interact with or consume art? Through what mechanisms and value systems is art assigned worth in society? What makes good art? What prompts us to say something is beautiful? Is there a place for art that is shocking and confrontational? I'm sure you can think of many more, but these are some that are discussed currently in many different arenas. And we also have some within our community, which I've heard some discussions at the various workshops and presentations at the conference so far. Why is learning to work with one's hands an important capacity in life? What are some of the roles art can play in devotional life? What might the prostitution of art mean, and why is it proscribed? And importantly, how can art contribute on a profound level to the process of human advancement? Why does it sometimes seem ornamental to our activities or an afterthought? So we'll maybe touch on some of those questions. We certainly won't answer many of them, but we would like to share this initial attempt at discussing our experiences making art, and share some of our reflective process. We'll have some images. I know that you would like to see those, and we'll be available to talk to people afterwards if you wish. Hold on a sec.
Do you want to just change spots? I just unplugged it. Sorry. I don't know how that affected the, it was this maybe. It's okay, the images will maybe hopefully return.
It's back. We're back.
It's always this sort of playing with the Holy Spirit atmosphere when you're dealing with technology. There's a lot of friends and even family and loved ones in the audience, but my favorite one of all is here in the second row, my daughter Ella. So it's very sweet that she's here today, and I'm glad that I could have this time to, I don't know, to sort of maybe speak to her as well as you. My dad became a Bahá'í in 1976. He was living in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, and he had just got out of drug and alcohol rehab, and he became a Free Methodist preacher. And his church went from 200 to 400 because he was a fire and brimstone evangelist for Jesus. And he ran across Baha'u'llah and the New Era in a used bookstore and began incorporating the words of Baha'u'llah into his sermons and teaching Aboriginal people in prisons and in AA. And he became a Baha'i as a result of this contact with the Holy Word from this book he found in a bookstore. So I thought about this moment as an artist, what changed in my life when my father encountered the Baha'i faith. Ishrat Naqvi was the first Baha'i, actually. He was afraid that my dad was a Muslim spy because he was so sort of fired up and radicalized. Anyway, I thought about this question a bit last night with some dear friends. We were having dinner with Stan and Lorraine Phillips, and I thought, what did Baha'u'llah give my father, and what did Baha'u'llah give me? What did he give us as Baha'is? I thought when I became a Baha'i, I was invited into the most beautiful house with the most beautiful furniture and the most beautiful carpets and the most exquisite fruit. I was welcomed into this house as though I was a long-lost son. I was loved, and his love was real, and it allowed me to meet his family. His love introduced me to his son and his daughter and his grandson, not as a stranger, not as a 7-year-old son of a former alcoholic, not as a son of a single parent, white, ghetto. He welcomed me into his home as one of his chosen loved ones. And when I was invited into this house, the greatest gift he gave me was his love in the form of his words. And these words would forever remain a key into his presence. What gift was I given when my father became a Baha'i? It's undescribable. And I think in my art, I went back to this moment of reunion. This is a picture of me before my dad became a Baha'i. You might notice the beer bottles there, and that was my home, the little sleeping bag. I went from house to house, and that's what I carried with me. This is one of my father's paintings. When I start to consider this question of what did my father give me when he became a Baha'i, and maybe this is a question you can ask yourself. Sometimes we hear, the institute process or devotional gatherings, what are we supposed to do? What is the job? I'm tired, I'm busy. I've got so many responsibilities. I'm a father, I'm a mother, etc. But maybe instead of asking the question, what do we need to do? Maybe we can frame the question, what a priceless gift we were given. Anyway, so in this exhibition that I did, I went back to Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, where my dad went into this rehabilitation center, and I went to the rehabilitation center. I went and visited it, and I found some Baha'is who still lived in Moose Jaw. Her name was Melanie Gaston Sabarin. And actually, her husband killed himself. Melanie Sabarin and her husband Gaston were Baha'is, and he committed suicide. I went and visited her, and I asked her about that. And I asked her about me and my father, and she remembered us. She was friends. There were not very many Baha'is in Canada, especially in Moose Jaw. There was like 3. So anyway, I went back there, and in her archives, I found this image of a newspaper clipping that the Baha'is had taken out in 1960 in Moose Jaw. And what an audacious clipping to put in the Moose Jaw newspaper, which is a very Christian fundamentalist place. And it says, "Have you heard of Baha'u'llah?" This became the question that I posed in my art and in the community of artists around me. And I started to think about the relationship between abstraction and spirituality. But instead of abstraction existing as a kind of universal language, as a global utopian striving after pure form, I tried to contaminate the language of abstraction with my own history, my own biography. And in this case, I was combining Alcoholics Anonymous with the universal language of abstraction. This is the symbol for Alcoholics Anonymous, but it's also the Platonic triad. This is also a theosophist symbol. It exists in everything, but I was particularizing it in the language of recovery. And these were some watercolors that I was doing, was playing with this idea of abstraction and spirituality. And you can see in this image how the question, "Have you heard of Baha'u'llah?" was refracted and scattered around the room in combination of personal, biographical reflections and then more open questions about art and faith. This image here is a sculpture that I did, and it's called The Carpenter. And it was a reference both to my father as a carpenter and also to Jesus as a carpenter, and actually also to the act of carving as a kind of something that I could get my hands around. This was another small image from that show, conflating the language of recovery with the language of abstraction and spiritualism, etc. This was the cover of the book that my father encountered in 1975, 76. And when I see this cover, actually, I get choked up. And I really have a hard time controlling my emotions today. I'm just bursting with emotion. This was a print I made, a diazo print. It's a print where you expose paper to the sun. And these were some images. The one in the middle is the Alcoholics Anonymous cover with a picture below it of Mirza Abul Fazl. This is not meant to be provocative. It was as a child I saw the face of Abdul Baha, Mirza Ahmadi, Mirza Abul Fazl, and it was a curious, evocative, redolent invitation. But it's also contrasted with Alcoholics Anonymous and this sort of prism. You could see the entire show from the street, and that's what I wanted. I wanted you to be able to take in the whole thing at once. After that exhibition, I had a bit of maybe a breakdown and began to really question things. And this is just a picture of my studio. You can see the questioning. You can see kind of the hunger, a search for something. And then I returned to these images and these watercolors. And this actually was chosen for a magazine as the cover. And it was this exploration of these same questions. And you can see some of the material explorations as well. And it brings me to this show that I had recently called Display. I'm probably going... This is your water?
You can have it.
Thank you, Leili, dear Leili.
My half-drunk water.
In this exhibition, I was no longer thinking about the general sort of realm of abstraction and spirituality, but I wanted to pinpoint the question of spirituality in religion. To what's the word? To make it didactic and clear. And so I found this image from Baha'i World, which was a 1963 display booth in Toronto at the CNE. Again, audacious. These Baha'is were so audacious. And it says, "Say all are created by God." And the exhibition was on Dundas Street in Toronto at a very cutting-edge contemporary art gallery. And I thought, wouldn't it be interesting to emblazon, "Say all are created by God," in the most secular, in the most maybe even atheistic space that I could think of, which was a commercial gallery in the heart of the gallery district in Toronto. And I thought it would be a provocation. I made this little video here. I don't know how to make it go. Oh. Does it go? Is it going? It was going. Let's try again. Going? Okay, so I made this little video as just so you get a sense of this drawing, because you can't really see it in pictures. And it's almost 8 feet long, and it's a very simple drawing of this display booth. But over top of the drawing was overlaid a grid. And the grid is 2 millimeters by 2 millimeters square. And within each of the 2 millimeter squares are 5 points. And it was that grid that took 9 months to draw. And I had 3 studio assistants that worked with me. So the idea was there was an image that is being presented. There was a display that was being presented. But how do we represent this question of the Baha'i faith? And so at some point the image would disappear and all you could see was the screen of dots. And so there was a flipping between representation and process. And that became kind of the question that animated the exhibition. And this kind of hovering between an image and just a veil, an image and just mist, an image and light. And yeah. And then from that image, I went in and took certain passages and explored them. You can see here how the drawing is on one side and the paintings kind of enter into it and walk out of it. And it was a question about the role of religion in our imagination and narrative. These were some images from that. And the most recent show I had was at Oakville Galleries, which is a museum just outside of Toronto in Oakville. It's a house with 4 rooms. And I won't go into great detail about this other than to say that I continue to ask the question of the relationship between religion and modernity. And in this case, I asked, what is it, where does it reside in me? Not as a display and not as an abstraction, but inside. And the question started to emerge about craft and about process. So these are weavings that you see. The painting there is actually woven. It was a picking up on that drawing of the process of repetition. So it's impossible to go into great detail about this exhibition, but this was one of the sculptures that was also included in that show, entitled "What is a Self?" This was also a sculpture from that exhibition which operated like a shelf. It was like an inventory. What could be stored? What would be maintained? What would be recorded, archived, kept? What would be discarded? And these are all things that I've been grappling with in the studio, and the shelf itself became kind of an object. And last, because I haven't been keeping track of time, and I'm sure I'm probably... Sorry, I'll end with this slide. I have a show that comes up in Norway in a month, less than a month. And it is a series of weavings that are going on the floor. And the show is called "The Window is Also a Door." And it is a reference to being invited in. And the weavings on the floor could be something like prayer mats. And again, it's in a very contemporary, secular space. So to occupy that with a series of handmade, woven mats is a gesture that hopefully will ask some of these same questions. Thank you.
I'm a ceramic artist, currently working in a studio at MIT in Boston, Mass. And at this studio, I work alongside a lot of math PhDs, computational biologists, physicists, etc., on art. It's a different kind of a perspective because their approach to their work is very systematic and really into learning in little bits. So instead of it being all about everybody expressing their egos in the studio and self-expression, it's a lot more about, I'm going to make this iteration of this glaze, about 4 or 5 of them. Are you in or are you out? So I've been in this studio. Okay, here we go. All right, I'll get back to it. Some quotations. O people of Baha, the source of crafts, sciences, and arts is the power of reflection. Make ye every effort that out of this ideal mine there may gleam forth such pearls of wisdom and utterance as will promote the well-being and harmony of all the kindreds of the earth. I included this because for me, making art is a very reflective process, and it's much larger than making a thing. This is a selection from Bernard Leach, the great potter, artist, lover of peace, and Baha'i. A potter on his wheel is doing two things at the same time. He's making hollow wares to stand upon a level surface for the common usage of the home, and he is exploring space. His endeavor is determined in one respect by use, but in other ways by a never-ending search for perfection of form. Between the subtle opposition and interplay of centrifugal and gravitational force, between straight and curve, are hidden all the potter's experiences of beauty. Under his hands, the clay responds to emotion and thought from a long past, to his own intuition of the lovely and true, accurately recording the stages of his own inward development. The pot is the man. His virtues and his vices are shown therein. No disguise is possible. And finally, this is something I think about a lot, this passage from Dr. Farzam Arbam. The basic forces that need to shape an individual's sense of purpose are attraction to beauty and thirst for knowledge. Attraction to beauty gives proper direction and to purpose. Beauty and perfection become standards and guiding lights by which one is able to judge one's own behavior. On one level, this attraction manifests itself in love for the majesty and diversity of nature, in the impulse to fashion beauty through the visual arts, music and crafts, and in the pleasures of beholding the fruits of these creative endeavors. It is also evident in one's response to the beauty of an idea, the elegance of a scientific theory, and the perfection of a good character in one's fellow human beings. Okay. So I was going to discuss the process of making a pot. I'm nearly going to be out of time soon, so I just want to show some images. I'll say very briefly. When you're making something out of clay, you have to first wedge the clay to get all of the air out of it and to make it plastic and consistent. If you don't do this, you'll have little pockets of air in the clay that are hidden, and that you won't find out about this until maybe the last stage of firing, when the pot explodes in the kiln. It's a very important principle to adhere to, that you invest your effort and your faith in this early initial stage. It's kind of a chore, but you know that there will be a payoff later in not destroying all of your hard work. Then you have to center the clay. Again, if you skimp on this technical principle, the pot will dance around and sometimes it flies off the wheel, slapping another colleague on the side of the face. It's a very important thing that, it's okay, it's centered enough, it will come back to bite you later. And then there are principles governing the way that you raise the wall, the way you must give the piece enough support so that it won't slump later. You have to be kind to the clay. As one of my first teachers 25 years ago said, she was a hippie, she said, "Remember, if you are not centered, the clay will not be centered. And I rolled my eyes really hard, but she's absolutely correct about that. And she also used to say, remember everyone, sometimes the clay wants to be what the clay wants to be. Also exactly correct, but also warranting an eye roll. So then you throw it on the wheel, you let it get a little bit drier, it's called leather hard, and then you trim it to make that nice foot and take off the excess clay. And then you can decorate it, you can do things like that, and then you fire it the first time. It becomes porous. And you add glaze to it, which is absorbed by the wall, and it fuses with the clay in a second firing. I was going to show another video, but I'm afraid. I'm scared. So I might do it at the end. Yeah, I just said those things. And a lot of breakage happens along the way. Just as with our development as individual souls, it's not all triumphs. It's not all finished, shining bowls that have function and form. This particular case, a table that about 12 of my pieces were sitting on was made of corian, decided to split itself in two spontaneously for no reason. So that was a great experience in detachment. This one, I spent about a week carving it, not including in my calculations the fact that the surface area on the inside was about 2/3 more than the outside, and it dried too quickly, and it broke itself up in these lovely pieces. Somebody picked this up on the shelf and broke it. This one exploded in the kiln because I didn't adhere to those technical principles. And this I spent a long time on. This is a sea urchin. I don't want to tell you how long I spent on this. I was taking it off the shelf, and a freshman knocked my elbow. So this happens a lot. Don't be sad. Don't be sad. It builds character. Character and detachment. And I include these because I have noticed in my process that when I'm making something, the instant I think, this is so good, such and such is gonna love this. Wow, I have outdone myself. It breaks. Almost every time. So the clay is my master, apparently. And I'm just going to very quickly go through these pictures. I won't say much. It's just pictures at the various stages of making a piece. These are greenware, which is they haven't been fired yet, and they've been decorated with slip, which is liquid clay. This is getting heated up at the spa. That's loading the kiln. Making plans. This is glaze. It looks chalky and pastel before it's fired, and then it has color and durability after it emerges, and the colors are completely different. This is wax resist that you put on before you put on glaze, and that's a finished piece on a finished piece. And I'm afraid, but can I show just one more video? It's 1 minute. Okay. And while we're grappling with this, my thing I wanted to share with you is that I hope you will become involved in the arts. I don't believe in this idea that there are art people and math people. I think that those are aspects of the soul, and that they're for everybody's training and for everyone to participate in. Stripes. That one, yeah, thank you. And I very much encourage everyone to participate in it, perhaps because I've been able to do art in a sort of a science setting, but they're not so different. Okay, you can. here. Yeah, you have. Yeah, sure.
Good morning, everyone. First of all, I have to say that I'm really so pleased to be here with my brother-in-law, Sky Glabush, and who I think I'm his biggest patron. Officially, I've bought the most number of Sky Glabush pieces in the whole world. And of course, dear Leili, who I've known for a long, long time and have been following on Instagram. I don't know if you all follow her Instagram, but pretty amazing stuff. I think what's being asked of us, I'm really so thankful to be able to speak to this topic because, of course, 10 minutes doesn't really give it justice. But how do we combine our work with our faith? And it's something, obviously, that all of us think about. I was trying to think, how can I be most helpful today? And I was thinking that probably what I'd like to do is speak to the young people in the audience, because that's where my heart really resides. I have a 26-year-old and I have a 23-year-old, and they're both very active in their own ways, in their professions and in the faith. And I know what a struggle it is. And so I want to say, first of all, I agree with Sky. We're really very, very fortunate to have Baha'u'llah. That's for sure. And I think that it's very clear that the means for the spiritualization of the world will come about through the arts. It's very clear in our writings. Abdul Baha speaks emphatically that material structures can have spiritual effects. And I remember when I was sort of my son's age at Yale, and we used to go across the street to the Kahn building, I saw one day the security guard run his hand across the concrete, and I could feel it was very palpable. I could feel this security guard being moved by the building, and it struck me. And those are the kinds of things I think young people should experience, because it held me for the last 30 years in my profession, because I was wondering, how does a building do that? How does what we do move the spirit? How does it connect with the heart? And it's not an easy question to answer. And let me say, I really am still struggling with that, because the more that you touch it, the more it engages you. So I put up this picture of Majnun and Leili because it's the story that I love the most when I think about this. Because I think that in that sense, when we engage in the process, when I engage in that process, I will use the word once, I, because I think it's very important, because the I, this struggle with the self, this constant fight with the self, the I is really, I feel, has a really similar, crazy relationship with search that Majnun has. He becomes crazy. He searches everywhere. Searches in the ground, he searches up, you don't know. And you go, what's going on? And he's climbing walls, and sometimes he sees Leili, right? And that moment, we all know it in the creative process, is what keeps us going. It's like Baha'u'llah just gives us a little bit here, and then you get knocked about a lot, and then you give it a little bit more, and it keeps you going, and that's the thing. So I wanted to say that in my mind, the long obligatory prayer is really being very, very helpful when I think about this process. You know, in a daily way, it speaks to this idea of longing, yearning, beseeching, really, begging that you're somehow taken out of it, right? This struggle with the self, you're begging. You're saying, please, just remove the veil. Let me see a bit of that light. Let me touch your beauty, just a little bit. And I think that's the relationship that I have had with the creative process and beauty. A fire that will burn away the veils which have shut me out from thy beauty. Right? To ordain that I may gaze on thy beauty. I mean, these things, and if you say them and you beg, I think he gives you a little taste. I think we don't know, like language excellence. You use the word excellence. Excellence is everywhere. Every single bit of what I touch, everyone uses this word, excellence. Refinement, beauty. These are words that are so prevalent. But we have the guardian. And I can't say, for me personally, that's been so fortunate that we have the beloved guardian. Because when I think of excellence, when I think of craft, when I think of wisdom, when I think of a myriad of wise decisions, wise spending, the ability to put something exquisitely, like composition, proportion, all of these things, and I feel like I have to ask constantly, am I doing okay? Dear Shohi Effendi, am I doing okay? And I think this is part of the process. It's interesting, Sky put a picture. To the parents in the room, I thought I would talk a little bit about my mom and dad and some of that, because I think way before I even knew I was going to be an architect, I was surrounded by my father, who was this practical engineer. He was, constantly looking at the reason. And my mother, who was this exquisite aesthete, she would surround us with beautiful objects. I remember holding wonderful spoons, and I can still feel the quality of these spoons that were made in Norway, and this wonderful furniture, and the kind of the refinement of her cooking. And so I think that those are the things those are the memories that I draw on many, many times when you're trying to think about how to make good work. And of course, architecture is definitely a highly collaborative enterprise. I mean, we're now up to about 100 architects. We have specialists. It's like an orchestra. We have specialists in each and every domain. And so I think as Baha'is, how to work in large groups is really part of the most exciting parts of what I do. That dynamic of solving problems together, kind of throwing it, living for the surprise that comes out of that process. So I found this early sketch of the temple. I didn't even know, I'd forgotten that I had it, but it was right almost very early on. So where does this, this mystical combination of intuition and reason that comes all together in this kind of tiny little sketch. The sketch is about an inch round. And then by holding on to some of this, it's amazing how in the very, very, very early period, I could see the DNA of the temple. But then, as Leili said, we went through a lot of breakage. And I think this is something that I think young people should know, that I think the long obligatory prayer and that relationship with prayer helps you get through the dark times. So it's so important. And you hit a lot of blind alleys. And so I think when I think of the guardian, I also think of patience. I think of persistence. And those are really important qualities in this process. I wanted to put this project, we just entered a competition for an important theater group, Stratford Festival Theatre here in Canada. And There was 92 architects around the world that were invited, that were then reduced to 18, then 8, then 4, then 3, and then we were put into a full-on competition. I wanted the young people to know that part of this is also throwing your hat in the ring. I mean, it's pretty amazing sometimes even to me to think that we put 3 months of really intense work, and we don't know if we're going to get the job. But that you start with these early feelings for the project. I was thinking of this veil on the water that has this kind of sinuous quality, and then I ran into this, or I encountered this Joseph Beuys collage, which was, I don't know where these things come from. I don't know why I said, or we said, that's pretty cool. And that happens all the time, and I think that's part of the question. I think I'd like that we try, I don't know, it's intuition, reason, the mixture. And I loved the way that he had put this flower on the river, and I thought, well, what if we had, like those river plants, you know, a theater project that reached out in that way, and eventually that became the outside, and then that became the veil, and that became the image. And we just found out last week that we were selected, so that was good news. I put this in, this is for my father-in-law. All of us have to work for family members at one point or another. But I put it in because I thought small projects are really important. They're really important even now, but especially in your early years, because you're forming, I think, what I call a language. And a language is very important because you evolve a language and you start to feel like you have something that you like. And this is something I talk about a lot with students, that you have to say, I like this, and I don't like this. And somehow it feels awkward because, oh, well, what's my will got to do with it? Well, I think our will is very important. This is our greatest gift that we were given. And we have to somehow put our will in there. And so small projects force you to reduce and force you to work with economy. I mean, my father-in-law said, look, I have $60,000, that's it. And I'm gonna put it all in to making a studio, right? I mean, that was his nest egg. And so we had to be on budget. So this idea of a small project, creating a space, an invitation for him to do his wonderful work, was an extraordinary assignment, beautiful collaboration, and certainly we didn't want the project to speak down to his art. But then you jump scale. This was the Ivy project, and I think it's really important for young Baha'is to be involved with institutions, because you'll get a whole different collaboration. Institutions are bodies. They have multi-clients. It's not a single client. And you have to somehow work within a much larger arena, which involves all kinds of forces. But at the end of the day, holding on to what I think I started with, which is that this spiritualization of the world is dependent on somehow our engagement with beauty, is a pretty powerful thing to hold on to. And what won this competition, which was also international, so we were fighting against people from all over the world, was this idea that they wanted a student to walk in, and if they were deciding between this school and that school and that school, that they would feel like they wanted to go to school here. And that's an emotional reaction. It's not a rational thing. And I think as Baha'is, I think we have that engagement with an emotional, let's say, part of the discourse. And I think that was pretty helpful as we were trying to figure out what that environment would look like. Aspiration is another thing I wanted to talk about, which is something that we now find more and more. This is for a member of the Weston family, and so you get this very intimate relationship with clients that is highly aspirational. And so you form a kind of a common language of what defines, let's say, a comfortable space, a space that they want to be in, how it engages with landscape. And so I think those are wonderful assignments because they really push you in to do your best work. And I don't know how else to describe it, but that is really a big part of what I do, is there's a relationship that bounces back and forth between our work and the client. And I don't think it's possible for us to do good work without good clients. So that I put this in there because I wanted to talk a little bit about that, because this project probably was one of those projects of a lifetime. This was for the inventor of the BlackBerry. And he said, look, you know, I'm not one for anything that isn't going to be anything less than, he said, magic. So, and you know, he always says fortune favors the bold, and so we began. It was a competition, and he had this extraordinary cliffside site on the water, and you can see this kind of crazy Majnun search for the form. We had this idea of this wing spread over the cliff, but how does it work? Where's the idea? How will it work as a complete idea? And eventually we won and we built this together. And I receive, I tell you, emails from him that I treasure, where he says, you just can't believe the wonder that I get from just going to this space. And that is the kind of thing that keeps you going. I wanted a little bit, I'm so happy that Leili started with that quote from the Bob on refinement and detail. And I think that it always surprises me how much is in a detail. Like if you can feel the whole in the detail, then the work is pretty good. And we always say that to ourselves. If you can't get the whole, like if the detail feels like it's one thing and then this thing feels like another thing, well then you're just kind of doing a little of this and a little of that. Well, my mother's cooking was never a little of this and a little of that. Let me tell you, it felt like a complete thing. And I think the detail is very important, and texture is very important. And we work with a lot of artisans, and we work with a lot of craftsmen. And those relationships are really wonderful. This stair, which was part of that BlackBerry house, is completely suspended without any support. And so there is a really extraordinary combination of engineering and craft and material. And when you put the three together, it actually results in something that you really couldn't imagine. Furniture, form making, the idea of joining, which I think is so important. How things come together. Well, you can imagine all of the spiritual overlays in a concept like that, right? And many architects try to homogenize the complexity of things coming together. I like the idea that things actually come together with a certain amount of resistance and tension, and that you resolve the tension through the way that they come together. I think that that's what I think is an exciting next chapter in this idea of bringing ourselves together with diversity. You're holding me to my 10 minutes? I'll finish in 1 minute. And finding the image, slowness. I wanted to talk a lot about slowness and discovery and the idea that actually there's an ancient use of materials. Like the temple actually uses bronze, cast glass, and stone. And I love this idea that the absolutely innovative can go back and reach deep into the idea of our ancients and how we can transform that so that it feels light and sinuous. And I wanted to talk about the idea of sinuous. Something as inexpensive as plaster can be made really wonderful with just the right texture, surface, and light. And then, of course, Dr. Arbab touched on this, and I think others have touched on this, but the idea that you combine science with the arts, and I'm always amazed with geometry, and in particular with the temple, I love technical drawings. I really love them the most. I love all of the hand sketches and watercolors and things, but the most beloved of all the drawings I love are the technical because they're so precise. They don't leave any room to let anything waver, and especially with modern technology, it's getting even more and more amazing what's possible. A beautiful whole. We can talk about that. I think it's really important in architecture to create wholeness, that you feel that something is complete, that you can't just rip something out of it very easily or add something very easily. And of course, you know that the idea for the temple was always this idea of embodied light. This inspired from this wonderful quote from the Seven Valleys where a servant is drawn unto me in prayer. And if I choose to answer his prayer, so I always love that part, then the master appears in his house and his very beings becomes pillars of light. And I thought, wow, I remember I was struck by this and I thought, how can we make a building that embodies this idea that you reach out in prayer, and if he answers your prayer, the building becomes embodied in light. And this idea from bourgeois of two layers. But rather than letting the light go through, what if we captured the light? And so it took us 2 years to invent a material that would do that with the cast glass, and then to find this wonderful Portuguese stone, and then put the two layers together. And I love the fact that in the evening, of course, it sits across the city, but then during the day, it reverses itself. And so you get the light hitting, and then it becomes like this luminous tent. And the stone, which we found, is 7 generations. This quarry was holding on to this stone. He said, I'm not going to let it go because I'm looking for just the right project. So we were very happy that he let it go. And I always tell the young people that what I love the most about the process is that you get surprised. That's what you live for. Because if you knew where you were going, it would be really boring. And so I like this idea that the process, like Majnun, is like a controlled abandon. It's like falling backwards and letting the process catch you. And it requires faith, of course, requires trust. And I think that we have this extraordinary relationship in the faith where everything is situated within this idea of a larger thing. And so to go to a temple or a shrine, you get put through this amazing landscape experience. You don't just fall off a sidewalk and enter in. And I think that this is something that we should think about. Why does that happen? And the fact that we took the geometry of the temple and just extended it and radiated it out and created this thing which says the landscape, the building, the interior, the architecture, it should all feel like it's one thing. And I like that idea as a kind of an inkling towards what beauty might mean. And this is looking up. I remember Mr. Dunbar constantly telling me, make sure it looks like you're gazing up at the heavens. So I'll let you tell me if you feel that, but that was, how do I start this? This is from about a month ago. As you know, we're 52 working days away from the dedication. I wanted to... I think when the House of Justice makes a decision, of course we know its outcome is assured. And I had a wonderful occasion to work closely with the House, and I see that this, in hindsight, was a wonderful blessing, that even, as Dr. Mohajer said, even if a piece of wood would achieve great results in that kind of dynamic, but really it's impossible given the time to express the gratitude that I have in my heart for the House of Justice, for allowing this humble servant the privilege and the honor of participating and playing our role. And so I think for this I'm immensely grateful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Siamak. Thank you, Sky. Thank you.
Way over time.